Hello everyone, it's Matthew here again. And if you're new to my YouTube channel, I raise awareness of unpaid carers, mental health, especially if you're caring for someone with long-term illness that either been mental health, cancer, and equity. And this time, there's a excuse me, I'm focusing on equity again, which is reducing racism. From my background, I know you can't easily tell, but if you know me, I'm black. And I've been through a ton of racism. I still go through it. There's bias or stereotypical views of, how people perceive minority groups. And in this day and age, 2025, unfortunately, it's taken a turn. Um, and you might have heard the term woke quite a few often. It can be used in a good way and a bad way, to be honest. But I always find it funny. The ones that complain about it are the ones that don't often have that lived experience of racism. I'm not saying it's across the board. Anyone can be racist. It doesn't have to just be the majority. We all can do it. I've done it without even realizing it. And it might be a learned condition or situations you find yourself in where you don't particularly know or understand what you've done. And all I can say is, what can we do to reduce it? And this is basically the point of the lecture, but it looks at society rather than too much on the individual. From what I have Googled around and heard from others, and I'm just trying to be honest with myself on what I think would make society more inclusive. What we don't want is fragmentation in society, where again, people just don't trust each other, and it's easier for discrimination, easier for conflict. And that's when communities start to fall apart. So before I do continue, and this is quite a long video lecture, if you wish, if you like the topic matter of what I present, feel free to give the video a like, subscribe. um, and I'm hoping you won't miss stuff from the videos. I mean, I've got my blog as well, so I'll put that in the video description. So let's continue on with this. How can we effectively reduce racism? Reducing racism, though, does require a community-wide effort. I did say the focus is on an inclusive society. It's not just the individual, because yes, it can start that way, but it's slow. So it's about us working together. And one of the ways is promoting empathy, seeing things from another person's perspective, understanding, why does racism actually hurt other people? And to be honest, racism can even hurt the person practicing it. It's not a good place to be. To reduce racism also requires systematic change, and I will bring in the focus on policy and law. It's not just holding hands together. It's not as easy as that. So when addressing racism during politically polarized times, which is what I've just mentioned just a moment ago, 2025, it has become politically charged. It's important to focus on actions that can bridge divides, create safe spaces, and allow advocacy for policy changes that promote equality. So I'm going to put down some key steps that I've come across that I felt, that's a great idea, especially when we're now living in a society that's highly diverse. We've we have to now. We're in it together, basically. And it's not just the reason, that's the reason to do it. It's not just, oh, because we're in it together, that's the only way. I would go farther than that and say, look, this makes for a more inclusive society, a civilized society, a society that works and is wiser from its challenges, no matter what is being thrown at it. So the first thing would be through conversations, not just conversations for the sake of being racist and trying to challenge each other, but conversations on race and bias. What does it really mean? But the only way you can really do that, well, one of the best ways is to create safe spaces where racism and bias can actually foster without us even knowing it. It starts young, so it's creating safe spaces in schools where education is the key. Workplaces are no different, just because we expect when people become mature working adults that they're not prone to specific behaviors. The workplace should also have some focus on this. And also outside in the community where people can actually discuss race, bias, and systematic inequalities openly and safely without threat and without ridicule or being closed down or what they say nowadays is being cancelled. With an education on history and bias, this allows education, especially on history and the ongoing impacts of racism, to help others recognize systematic patterns, and they are there. And with education and understanding, though, the impacts of racism, then it gives us a chance to work out why these things have not been previously understood. I'm not saying these things are easy, they're very challenging, complex, and very powerful. Um, in order to tackle those things, you have to tackle power. Who stands to gain out of it? So encourage open conversations on race and bias. And it's more than just those two things, but it's a great start. It all starts with conversation and education. Promoting media literacy, with the impact of social media and the impact of technology, is always a risk for misinformation. So a community that has media literacy has a chance to educate people to recognize and challenge stereotypes and biases portrayed in the media. And don't get me wrong, the media is again very powerful, especially social media. The good advantages of social media really is, if done well, it can be a brilliant place to tackle biases if you know what you're doing. I'm not saying it's easy to do it, but it can be brilliant to tackle it because whatever message you put on there stays up there. If the rules or those who host those sites allows for help in combating biases and racism and discrimination. And as mentioned, this is the day and age of misinformation. We must encourage media literacy to reduce the spread of misinformation that can lead to not just fair misunderstanding, but racism in itself. So it's important to challenge those stereotypes. And they are there. They're very easy to find. You can go to particular videos or blogging sites and you can see what's there. But do be careful though, if you're going to challenge them, um, there might not always be safe spaces because your profile and identity can be found and people can be called out on that. So you have to be really careful. But overall, promoting media literacy and training others to tackle misinformation, again, is a good start. And this goes heavily in the workplace, in the health service, across the board. So support anti-racist education in schools. So this is again somewhat a rehash of what I mentioned as number one, curriculum development. And I know this can be a tricky one because as the political climate stands, not the same in every country, but there are some countries that don't want this and feel that there's no place to address racism in education. But that doesn't mean we can't advocate for a curriculum that addresses racism, diverse histories, and cultural understanding. It's very important. We also have to encourage empathy and critical thinking. So there's ways to implement teaching methods that encourage empathy, that encourage inclusion and understanding of diverse perspectives. I've always been a fan of allyship, but I've always felt we can all speak with one voice. We might have different experiences, different challenges, but if we given the chance, um, this can help in regards to allyship and bystander training. What do I mean by that? Well, workshops. So offering training on how to be an effective ally, and basically it's being an ally of those who might be a different creed, back, culture, race from yourself. But you're supporting them by being an ally and helping to speak up. And this would tend to go to the majority of a culture of an area supporting the minority. So there's always room for allyship. And it's basically how to speak up against racist behavior or racist language in ways that are constructive and safe. And usually when with racism, there can be a situation where people just ignore it and not challenge it. So it helps encouraging the bystander intervention through training. So teaching people how to safely intervene or de-escalate racist incidents when they witness that in public and online. I've seen this happen quite a few times. It's all about community as well. So community events and dialogues, and yes, I've noticed a lot more of these spring up. But we can actually host events that actually bring people together from diverse backgrounds, focusing on shared values and norms and experiences. It's not just about community, it's also the interfaith and intercultural collaborations, which are always welcome. So it's engaging with faith-based and cultural organizations to promote unity and understanding across different communities. I'm not saying this is easy. In fact, as of today, it has gotten more tricky to do, but it doesn't mean we can't try. And I'm sure there's plenty of organizations out there that continue to try. Number six is promoting inclusive policies and practices. And I did mention this earlier on. It's not just events and educations, it's policies. So advocacy work, where we can work with the local authority, the local governments, to promote policies that support racial equality or equity, such as fair housing, equitable healthcare, and non-discriminatory policing. But what that means, though, it's a two-way thing. Obviously, the community has to be interested. They can't just sort of wait for these things to happen, and they need to look at the data to show these things are needed, which they are. Also supporting voting rights. We can advocate for policies that protect voting rights and ensure that everyone has equal access to participate in the democratic process. And these things are actually at risk. I find with democracy is always the case of, yes, you may be fair, but it's also very vulnerable. And the risk is that the minority, I suppose, and I'm talking about racists really, can be the loudest. And we may pay attention to them because they're so loud and because they can be disruptive, because they can be violent. So it's important that we can advocate for policies that protect the rights of those who want a fair system and to protect human rights. Empowering voices from underrepresented communities, so representation in leadership, where we can encourage and support diverse representation in leadership positions in schools, workplaces, government, and media. It's about empowering those voices, giving people a chance to make a difference in their community. We're working together to do this. And amplifying, giving a chance to raise those marginalized voices. Again, social media can't be ignored. Community meetings and other platforms uplift voices from underrepresented communities, ensuring their perspectives are heard and respected. I think it's encouraging self-reflection and accountability. And remember at the start of this lecture, I did say that even myself, I am prone to biases in the past. I've actually done forms of racism. I've done it. But without self-reflection and accountability, there's always a risk of these things happening again and again. You just might not realize it. So what do I mean by this? How can we encourage it? So it's training again, better education, encouraging people to be, take implicit bias assessments and participate in training. Role play. It's not just sort of sitting there listening and guessing what challenges are and how to respond to them. It's training to understand our own biases or their own biases and how that can affect behavior. And also promoting personal accountability. They educate on the importance of recognizing and correcting personal biases, holding oneself accountable to be part of a positive change. Again, I'm not saying this is easy. It can be a learned condition. And even then, we might think we've probably got away with it, but we don't realize the impact of our decisions, of our actions. So it's important to self-reflect and be accountable for our own behavior. No one's perfect out there, but given a chance, we should try. So engaging with businesses and employers in anti-racist initiatives. And in the past, I have gone through a fair bit of racism in the workplace. It can be hidden, but it's there. But what I mean by this is, again, it's training, diversity and inclusion training. So supporting the workplace initiatives that promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, and helping to create workplaces that reflect broader society, those broader norms. It shouldn't be any different to what happens out in the community. There is no hiding. If these things are allowed to grow, then it becomes a community issue, it becomes a wider problem. It also should, and this is down to data again, it's always the case where only the skilled should apply for positions. But then that's just kicking the can down the road. One could say, well, okay, you know, how and when was someone skilled to do anything in regards to the challenges they face or if they're employed? So we can't always just say it's education. It's a lot more than that. And data should show that there should be accountability in hiring and promotion. We should advocate for fair and transparent hiring and promotion and evaluation practices to prevent discrimination. We turn our backs and we look away, and it's quite possible for racism and biases to grow in workplaces. One might question why it is no in a diverse community, why there is no representation in the workforce. So again, data will show whether this is an issue. Now, I've always liked art and poetry, and it can be a powerful medium in helping to spread awareness. I do it all the time when it comes to raising awareness of unpaid carers, but we can use art and media as tools for awareness. So supporting inclusive arts, like promoting art itself, music, literature, and film that explore diverse perspectives and stories, helping to humanize and bring visibility of marginalized communities. It's also about storytelling, especially if it's in a safe place, and documentaries. Sharing stories can help others educate on the experiences of racial minorities and the impact of systematic racism or systemic racism. The next bit is strengthening anti-discrimination laws. So we're back to policy again. We should always try and support for legislative change, advocate for strong protections against discrimination in housing, employment, and the criminal justice system. There also should be police reform and accountability. Promote policies that increase police accountability, training on de-escalation and anti-bias practices, and community oversight. Also, I need to focus on encouraging empathy and humanity in political dialogue. This means focusing on shared goals when it comes to discussions on race and focusing on shared goals of safety, fairness, and respect to help bridge political divides. And certainly I'm rushing a bit regarding these points, having to keep the lecture fairly short. Also got to try and avoid using polarizing language, hence the use of that language can be exclusive. We want to be inclusive. We want something that's constructive and can build bridges and avoid inflammatory terms that may create defensiveness or alienation, which can be big problems in diverse communities. And we also want to look into the support for mental health resources for those affected by racism. Good example is trauma and stigma. One of the two out of many, there are many others on regards to the impact of racism. So again, community and school counseling ensure that mental health support is available for those who have experienced or been affected by racism. And as I mentioned, trauma. So provide training on trauma-informed care for those working with populations affected by systemic and personal racism. Also looking to advocate for equitable and economic policies. So addressing the income inequality situation. And I always thought, well, I always strongly feel when diverse communities are lacking in financial support, then they lack initiatives and the power to make a change. And it's always, I always feel the bottom foundation of everything really when it comes to being disadvantaged is income. So we can support policies and programs that reduce income inequality, as economic disparities often actually correlate with racial divides. Also look to promote equal opportunity. So advocate for equitable access to quality education, healthcare, and job opportunities, helping to dismantle the roots of systematic racism or systemic racism. We also want to model anti-racist behavior in daily life. So we should actually lead by example, be honest of our failings, look to treat others with respect, speaking out against racism and taking actions that I've mentioned before in supporting inclusivity and equity. And it's not just you learn for 1 year, you do one workshop for that year and you stop. It doesn't work that way. It's continual learning, commit to ongoing education on issues of race and bias, staying informed about the experiences of others and how to best support that change. So, in conclusion, I'd say reducing racism in society takes a combination of empathy, understanding and seeing things from the other person's view. Education starts when you're young in order to combat misinformation, especially on social media, and proactive change on both personal and systemic levels. And while the political climate can affect the speed and support of these changes in regards to individuals and communities, we can actually make meaningful strides by coming together around our own shared values of respect, equity, and human dignity. And I like to say, I wish this was the case. Really, there'll always be those out there that are racist, uh, take pride in promoting stigma and discrimination. I think the majority out there, do want a society that's inclusive, fair, and we practice empathy. I like to say, anyhow, thanks for taking time to watch this. As mentioned earlier, do give it a like if you found this video interesting. At least I hope it leads on to conversation and dialogue, and at most a way to spearhead into forms of change. Thanks again for dropping by, and remember to take care of yourselves.